Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, we're going to be talking about something that probably most of you people who are in midlife have probably had at one time or another, or perhaps even chronically, and that is back pain. On the program today, we're going to discover some of the nature sources that back pain can actually be caused, including dumb things people do, according to the book. And we'll also discover exercises and things we might want to consider that will help you to alleviate that very thing. The book is the Younger Next Year Back Pain book. And joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is someone who has extensive experience in helping people who can actually heal back pain with a rate of almost 80%. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Dr. Jeremy James. Thank you for being on the program today.
Hi, Daniel. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Now, what made you decide to go in the direction with back pain? Is this something that you've had for most of your life, or what was going on there?
Yeah, that's pretty close, Daniel. I experienced serious back pain as a young man from some outdoor sports and activities that I did, and I grew up in a medical family. My father and grandfather were both medical doctors. Mom was a nurse, aunt was a nurse, etc. And I went the traditional route at first. I tried the medical approach, and I was really frustrated, and it didn't get any real lasting relief. So after trying that for quite a amount of time, I found some short-term relief from a chiropractor. And although that specific chiropractor didn't teach me the things to get permanent relief, it did open my eyes to the idea that, you know, the way of looking at the body in another way, and it opened my eyes to the idea that back pain can be mechanical in nature, meaning it's a function of the way that you live your life. So that set me on to the path that I took and got me to where I am today.
Now, this is something that astoundingly, most of us have probably had back pain at one point or another in our life, and then there are some people that just suffer with it greatly, especially if they've been athletes. Right. You know, a guy that comes to mind right away for one reason is NBA legend Larry Bird. You know, anybody who knows anything about this guy realizes, wow, this guy was diving after balls just about every night during his career, and I remember he was saying there was an NBA player that had told him, you know, if you're going to stick around in this league, you know, you got to quit mopping up the floor every night. You know, and he says, well, look,
sure,
this is just the way I know how to play. But, you know, he says, as I get older now, you know, I feel the bangs, the bumps, and the bruises. I see where he's coming from. But eventually that's pretty much what, you know, ended his career, even though he had quite an extensive career. But you think to yourself, when you get to that point, you know, where you might have injured your back, let's talk about how some of the things you talk about in your book may be able to help people alleviate that. I don't know if that's an extreme case there or if it's possible that can actually happen where you can heal.
You absolutely can, and most people can, and we can talk later about how to identify if you're in that group. But, you know, the main thing that's missing out of most approaches to treating back pain is changing your behavior. By behavior, I mean the way you live your life, the way you carry yourself, the way you move, the way you work, the way you play. So you mentioned in your introduction dumb stuff. There's a chapter in the book where we say, stop doing dumb stuff. And it's just a humorous way to say, look, you've got to stop doing the things on a daily basis that are keeping your back aggravated and in a state of pain. And if you stop those things and learn ways to move and different ways to do those things in a spine-healthy way, almost always your back will heal. If you combine that with giving your back some support by building up strength in the muscles that support it. And so you really have to take that two-pronged approach to treating chronic back pain. You have to teach the person what they're doing wrong every day, change those activities to do them in a new spine-healthy way, and then rebuild their body so that their spine gets the support it needs. And most of the time, the pain will go away.
Now, I remember as I was growing up, the one thing teachers would tend to do is actually get after students who like to slouch in their chairs.
Right.
Now, when we're young rubber people, we're too dumb to know whether or not that's going to have any long-term effects. But let's talk about that, because this is even common among adults. What happens there to the back if someone is a person who slouches quite a bit?
Well, that's a great point, and your teachers really knew what they were talking about back then, believe it or not. You know, your posture. Posture means the way that you carry yourself, the way that you orient the joints and the muscles in your body. So posture is very important in relation relation to back pain. If we slouch, if you're, for instance, constantly slouch forward looking at your smartphone or tapping on a laptop, you're not distributing your body weight equally across the discs and joints in your back. You're putting excessive load through specific parts of those parts of your spine. So if we're talking about the discs in your back, which act kind of like shock absorbers between the vertebrae, when you slouch forward, you're putting a heavy amount of load, and by load I mean your body weight and gravity, through the very front parts of those discs, and you're pushing pressure through the back part of the disc. And that's not how that disc is designed to withstand load. So if you stay in that position hours on end or repetitive times throughout the day, you're wearing out that disc. And that's one of the ways that people get disc issues, disc herniations, bulging discs, etc. So posture is very important. You have to think about all this stuff in terms of mechanical load, and how you orient your body, how you orient your joints determines how you distribute loads through those joints, and there's a healthy way and unhealthy way to do that.
Now, also when it comes to work, especially for those who are in more physically demanding jobs when it comes to lifting, there's a lot of big-time mistakes that are made there too.
There really are, and if we're talking about lifting, the most common mistake is not using the muscles in your buttocks, the gluteal muscles. So one of those muscle groups, the gluteus maximus, is the biggest muscle in the human body, and that's for a reason. It is supposed to do big jobs. Those muscles were not designed to be a cushion to sit on, and unfortunately that's what we use them most for these days. But those muscles are supposed to get you up from a seated position, lift things off the ground, and most people, because of sitting mainly and other reasons, have learned to use the muscles in their low back to pick things up. And those muscles are actually quite small, especially when you compare them to the muscles in your buttocks, and they're not designed to repetitively lift things. They're designed to keep you erect and to sustain posture. The muscles in your hips are designed to lift things. And so, you do that couple 100,000 times over the course of years and years, eventually that's going to break down and you're going to have some problems.
Well, there's no doubt about that. Now, you also cover in your book when you were just briefly talking about earlier, but let's give an idea of some exercises that you recommend. I know when I was looking at the book, a couple of things came to mind when I was looking at a book on Chinese medicine, and some of the exercises they talked about had a lot to do with helping to stretch the back and the back muscles.
Mm-hmm. So, great question. The most important thing in the beginning of a back rehabilitation program is building endurance in the muscles that support the back, and quickly explain what that means. Endurance is not the same as strength. Strength means the ability to make a very forceful contraction quickly. Endurance is the ability to sustain a mild contraction over a very long period of time. It's much more important to build endurance in the muscles that support the spine than strength, and that's so that you can maintain good posture throughout the day. So a big mistake people make is trying to do strength exercises for their core in the beginning, and that can actually be counterproductive and damaging. So the exercises in the book, the basic exercises, they do several things. They teach you how to orient your joints in the right way. They teach you how to move, but importantly, in the beginning, they build endurance in the muscles that support your back so that you can maintain healthy positions throughout the day.
Now, I like as you go to strengthen your back, you talk about the advantages in your book of what that actually does all the way around. Now, when you have, let's say, these kinds of situations where you're stressing the back, how does that affect other parts of the body? Because it really becomes quite systemic where you might think to yourself, well, here I am maybe with knee pain or maybe even ankle pain, but is it possible that when you do stress the back, that whether you don't feel anything perhaps in your back, but in those areas there you begin to feel pain as well?
That's true, and it's actually more common in the reverse. I've seen countless people whose major back problems started with a sprained ankle or a knee issue or a hip problem, because if you have a sprained ankle, for instance, and you learn to walk in a slightly different way, you distribute the loads through your body every time you take a step up through your lumbar spine, your low back. And so changing your gait, changing the way you walk, changes the way that you distribute loads through your body. And eventually that ends up in your low back, and that ends up causing a redistribution of weight in your back, and it wears down some structures. So it's very common for people to develop back issues from a foot problem or a knee problem. And the other thing to consider is your core, and when I say core, I mean all of the muscles in your torso all the way around. Your core has to be balanced. So I've seen so many people who just think if they strengthen their abdominal muscles, that'll help their back. And that's not true. You have to have balance all the way around. It's like a bicycle wheel. The spokes all have to have equal tension, or like a suspension bridge. All of those cables have to have equal tension to support the bridge. It's the same with your core. You can't just hit one part of your core. You have to develop endurance and strength in all of the muscles all the way around to support your back.
Now, there was a particular chapter that I read, and I was kind of surprised, that doctors actually feel this way, but there was a particular doctor out there who was talking about how back pain is something that he felt could be psychological, that there is a mental component to this. And so you gave quite a bit of thought to that. And let's talk about that for a bit, because it's interesting when you think about sickness, disease, or even injuries. And perhaps you're not somebody who's active, but all of a sudden you feel pain. Mm-hmm. And you consider the emotional and psychological aspects of stress. What kind of conclusions did you draw there? Because you had your own personal experience with this.
I did. I'll answer that in two ways. First of all, I'll say that psychological stress can almost always exacerbate pain, make pain worse. I think in my anecdotal experience, and this isn't a clinical number, but in my clinical practice, about 10% of people that I've seen were strictly psychological, meaning their back pain was almost completely caused by psychological stress. The other 90% had some component, usually a majority component, of a biomechanical problem, meaning the muscles, the joints, and the ligaments, that was made worse with psychological stress. So for those 10% of people that it's solely psychological stress, very briefly, the way that works is it's all about what happens to our body when we're under stress. And it's the fight or flight mechanism. And it was a good thing for humans because it helps us do a lot of things we need to do. So when you're stressed, your body goes into fight or flight mode, and you divert blood from your core into your arms and legs so that you can fight or run away. You decrease digestion because you don't need to digest when you're in an acute state of stress. Your libido goes down. Lots of things happen, and that's a good thing because it allows us to either fight that or run away from that lion, 1,000 years ago, or fight an enemy. But now the problem is we live in a state of chronic stress, and we have problems that we think about all the time. And it keeps your body in a state of stress. And so since the blood is diverted away from your core, meaning the muscles that support your back, into your arms and legs, and your digestion is depressed and your immune system is depressed, that can actually physiologically cause back pain. And it's not in someone's head. There are actual things going on in your body to cause that pain. So we come to the conclusion in the book that yes, that happens. It's fairly rare, like I said, about 10% of my experience, but you should know about it. And if you've tried what you think is good conservative care and gotten no better, you should consider that stress can be a factor. And we mention a book that's written by a very well-known doctor. It's called Mind Over Back Pain by John Sarno. And rather than trying to get into that in our book, we just say, hey, go read his book because it's the gold standard.
Well, that's certainly an area to address as well, because it's pretty amazing when you think of the emotional, psychological component to pain, and that it actually does exist because it's through your thinking, or perhaps even your experiences is the one that you share within your book, that you actually stress the body because you got to think about the fact that you will tend to tense muscles.
Correct.
So as you're doing that, and you're doing that over long periods of time, you can see how, well, even though some people, even in the industry, considered him to be a quack, it's like, well, you're supposed to be a doctor and take a look at all aspects of healing. How can you just immediately dismiss that because you won't be able to sell drugs? I don't know.
No, you're exactly right. Mm-hmm. He was mocked, scorned, and made fun of for many, many years. He came out with these theories decades ago, and before he died, and he died recently, he was considered groundbreaking and a genius. So you're exactly right. He took a lot of bullets for that, but he ended up being correct.
They always are after the fact, aren't they?
Yeah.
Let's just hope you don't find yourself in that situation there. Now, here's a big one. a lot of people sitting in front of computers these days.
Right.
Okay. You have to think about, what are some good chairs to use, but most importantly, what are some good habits people should consider when they find themselves spending many hours per day sitting at a desk, in a chair, in front of a computer?
Well, you just nailed it, and I'm assuming that's because you read the book or you did some research, but you're exactly right. It's not as much about the chair or how you sit, it's about a habit, and that is movement. So one thing that we discuss in the book, and I'll give a brief overview, is the concept of creep. And what creep means is when you sit down, you're placing the tissues in your back, the ligaments, the discs, etc., under the load of your body weight. And after about 20 minutes, your discs and your ligaments start to bend and deform. And they do that so they won't snap. So it's a protective mechanism, which is good, but it's also bad because if you sit there for long enough, they start to bend and the discs start to change shape and you start to put unnatural or unhealthy loads through the joints. So the best way to avoid that, if you work at a computer, is, yes, you should practice good posture. But even sitting with good posture for hours on end is not good for you. The absolute best thing you can do is to move, and to move about every 15 to 20 minutes. If you can, getting up and walking for a minute or two is best. If you can go to the bathroom, go get a drink of water, walk around the office, that is ideal. If you're unable to do that, though, change your position every 15 minutes. Slouch to one side, and yeah, it's okay to slouch for a little bit. Cross one leg over the other. Do the opposite. Just move around so that you're changing the part of your back that's under the load of your body weight.
Now you talk about crossing your legs over, and I kind of wonder, is this something, if you're in the habit of sitting and crossing your legs, will that also cause back situations?
It will if you sit in the same position all the time. So if you sit with your right leg crossed over your left constantly and you do that hours on end, yes, you're going to stretch out the gluteal muscles on the right side, you're going to shorten your hip flexors on the left, and eventually you might develop kind of a torque or torsion in your pelvis. But the key, again, is symmetry and movement and trying to just always switch things up. I see a lot of people, either men with wallets, learn to sit a little bit crookedly, which can cause problems after years, or people that drive in the car a lot tend to lean to one side. You just got to change it up and try not to stay in one position for hours on end, day after day.
Now, I'd like to actually cover what you consider to be 7 cardinal rules to whole body behavioral approach. Now, let's go ahead and talk about those so people really get a good feel where they can consider what they're doing and what they can do about it.
Sure. Would you just like to start from the beginning?
Absolutely, please.
So we start with stop doing dumb stuff. And we touched on that briefly in the beginning. What that means is, most people realize that they're probably doing things they shouldn't be doing. And we just touched on several of them. Sitting hunched over a computer for hours, spending hours a day in the car, always being on your smartphone. Things of that nature. If you're an active person, it could be your weightlifting routine that you're doing that something is wrong in there, or if you're into outdoor sports. So the first chapter, or the first rule, stop doing dumb stuff, it means, look, to get over chronic back pain, you've got to stop all these things for a while. Now, with some changes in the ways that you do them, it's very likely you can get back to most of them, if not all of them, in the long term. But in the short term, and it depends on the severity of your condition, for maybe 6 to 12 weeks, you're going to have to stop doing that stuff so that your back can heal and so that you can start to introduce the healthy exercises and movements that will allow you to get over pain in the long term. That makes sense?
It absolutely does.
Now, rule number 2, be still so you can heal. Almost everybody is familiar and understands the concept of having a joint or a bone immobilized if you're injured. So say you break your arm. What's the doctor going to do? He's likely going to put it in a cast, and that's so that the bone can heal. It's similar with your low back. If you're having chronic back pain, obviously we can't put your back in a cast, but what you can do is learn to move in ways that don't move the lumbar spine a lot so that the tissues in there can heal. So Be Still to Heal teaches you the concept of neutral spine. Neutral spine means learning to find the position of your back that is the healthiest for it, and then keeping that in place as you learn to move from the hips and shoulders without moving from the back all the time. And that goes for lifting, walking, sitting, you name it. Mm-hmm. Rule number 3 goes on top of be still so you can heal. Rule number 3 is brace yourself. What we talk about there is using the muscles in your abdomen to lock that neutral spine position in place. So this is really the key to getting better. You teach a person to find the position of their low back that's the healthiest and the least uncomfortable, and then you use the muscles of the abdomen to lock that position in place as you go about your day. And typically, with people that are in significant pain, just learning this will bring the pain down significantly in a day or two. Number 4 is commit to your core, and that's teaching you how to use exercise to build endurance in those muscles that you use to brace the neutral spine. Following me on all this so far?
Absolutely.
Okay, these all build on top of each other. So commit to your core. You're doing those 7 daily exercises that you talked about earlier, and you're trying to build up endurance so that you can maintain that core brace as you go about your day. Number 5 is use the power in your posterior, and we're talking about those gluteal muscles. So this teaches you how to, number 1, wake up those muscles, because a lot of people, believe it or not, have actually forgotten how to use those, and I can sometimes spend hours with people, and it's usually more often men than women, just teaching them how to make a contraction in the muscles in their buttocks, and they have literally forgotten how to do it. So, and use the power in your posterior. We teach people how to wake those muscles up and then use them for activities like lifting, walking, sports, etc. The last 2 rules are really about building habits. So number 6 is crawl before you walk, walk before you run, and that's basically saying, look, a back rehabilitation program has to be slow and steady. You're going to have to master these moves in very simple ways before you can ever think about getting back to outdoor sports, weightlifting, whatever it is you want to do. You'll get there in the long term, but it's going to be a process. So crawl before you walk means you're going to have to master the simple stuff before you move on to the more difficult stuff. And finally, stand tall for the long haul means this is a lifelong habit. This is behavioral change. So you can do all the stuff that we tell you in the book, and the vast majority of people will feel a whole lot better. But if you put the book away and forget everything we've taught you, it's very likely you'll go back to where you were. This is like brushing your teeth or exercising for heart health or weight loss. You have to do this for the rest of your life, and it's really not that much. We're talking 15 minutes a day of exercise and just learning and adapting new ways to move.
You know, and that's so true, too. I noticed, for instance, one habit as I would go to take the bus somewhere. Sometimes you'll be sitting at particular stops where they have benches. Mm-hmm. And you sit on the bench, and I would notice that a lot of times I would kind of slouch over forward, which right. A lot of people tend to do, or they'll rest their arms, their elbows on their knees. And as I realized I was doing that, I'd say, wait a minute. So I'd kind of put my feet kind of underneath the bench a little bit, and then I would sit up straight. And I realized how much better I was feeling when I would sit that way.
Exactly.
You can actually feel the muscles work, but after a while you can't imagine or want to sit any other way. And the thing is, when you consider when you slouch forward like that, too, is what you're overlooking as well. For instance, how that affects your digestive system and your circulatory system down there in your gut area.
You're right. You're absolutely right. I was going to mention that. I'm glad you did. We're talking about back pain, and it's the most obvious, negative effect of slouching. But your circulatory system isn't doing the job that it could. You're breathing at a more shallow rate. You're not breathing as well as you can, so you're not getting as much oxygen. There are lots of diseases that have been correlated with sitting with bad posture.
Such an amazing thing to consider, and such simplicity all at the same time. Books that tend to deal with health in some cases tend to be overly complicated, and you can see why people don't want to move forward. They just feel, this is too much work. I'm not in that bad a shape right now. Right. But the truth is, when you start having that thinking, that's certainly one of those habits you'll want to change, is your thinking behind the fact that, well, it may not seem like it's affecting you now, or it may be small and you can kind of pain your way through it, but you keep that up, and it's going to grow in ways that you can't imagine, to a point where you really wished you had paid attention and started doing something about it early, so that it was a lot easier to deal with.
Oh, you're absolutely right. One of the things that everybody should know is that, prevention is so much easier than fixing back pain. And you have to do quite a bit of damage in most cases before you actually feel pain. So typically by the time you're in significant pain, you've really gone way down that road. So adapting to healthy habits and movements early in life is such a good idea. It will save you so much trouble and heartache and pain. And in addition, an added benefit is if you're into sports or outdoor sports or weightlifting or anything like that, it will make you a much better athlete. I mean, this is the way that your body is supposed to move. And when you move the way that your body is supposed to and sit and stand the way that you're supposed to, your body functions a lot better. So, not only are you going to feel better, you're going to be a much better athlete, much more powerful, you're going to move more easily.
No doubt about that. The book is The Younger Next Year Back Book. Our guest, Jeremy James, joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program. Is there a website, a place people can find out about your work, how to get the book, and how to alleviate back pain and other things they may be suffering from?
Yeah, Daniel, thanks for asking. It's www.backforever.com. All one word, back forever.
Very good. I got to tell you, I'm feeling better already.
I'm glad to hear that. I enjoyed
Thank you so much for being on the program today and sharing this valuable information with our audience.
Hey, thank you so much, and I appreciate the obvious research you put into this before our call. Thank you.
Hey, man, it's backs. You better pay attention, because
right.
if somebody else has to, you also have to look at the expense of something like that as well.
That's right.
I don't know. I can think of better ways to spend my money, especially if I can prevent these things.
You're right. You're exactly
Thank you so much for being on the program today.
Thank you for having me.
We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. Once you get your back straightened up and you're feeling a lot better, go ahead and start visiting us at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. It won't be a very painful thing for you to do, and you can discover more by also signing up for our weekly e-newsletter as well. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.